What is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here, and welcome to the Nebula Music Podcast. This is a show where I talk to some of today's most inspiring and influential musicians of the music industry with the goal of exploring their mindset. Today I'm excited because I have Donovan Melero of the band Hail the Sun joining me. I'm very excited for this specific interview because Donovan is a multitasker, jack of all trades, just like yours truly, and I get very excited when I talk to people that are involved in both music and the business side of the music industry because it's a lot more rare than you guys realize, and it takes a certain type of person to be able to create a hybrid career where you're successful on both ends, and I'm always inspired and excited to learn from people like that. Donovan is a very knowledgeable man, and I'm very excited that he took time out of his very busy day to drop by the show and share some knowledge. So let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right in. What is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here again with the Nebula Music Podcast, and welcome to another awesome interview. Today, I'm really excited because I have someone who I think you guys are going to enjoy hearing from. And let me just tell you guys this. It's been a very interesting journey trying to get this interview recorded. There's been a lot of things that have been happening in between. But my man here has been very patient. And I love what he's doing, man, because this guy's busy. He's very talented. He's on tour. He's currently recording right now. And we're having this interview. I love this guy. Donovan, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, Eddie, I'm doing good, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, man. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for always being open to do this kind of stuff. And dude, you're massively talented. You're a drummer.
Thank you.
You play for an amazing band. You're a drummer. We relate on that. And you do so many other things. And while I could spend a long time sort of talking about you, I never like to do that. I like to make sure that you're the one who talks about yourselves, and I know no one's here to hear from me. So I like to start every episode by sort of asking my guests to sort of just give me a little bit of your backstory, kind of tell me a little bit of where you got started, maybe where you're from, maybe your musical background, and we'll sort of take it from there.
Sure, dude. Okay. So kind of to sum it all up, I was born and raised in Ventura, California, lovely coastal city here. I was
Nice.
Grew up about 10 minutes away from the beach. I went to school out here until I was 18. And at that point, I moved up north to Chico, California, where I attended Chico State University to study music, the recording arts and music industry.
Yeah.
I liked it so much up there that after I graduated in 2011, I stayed for a couple of years before moving back down to Southern California to further pursue the career in music. And I started playing myself around the age of 5. My parents got me a drum set when I was in kindergarten, which to me would seem like some parents' nightmares. To have their small child banging on drums.
That's impressive, man. I mean, yay. Congratulations to your parents, because I know my parents didn't do that.
Yeah, man. They continue to be an immense support system for me. But anyway, they got me the drum set throughout my youth into my preteen and then teenage years, essentially into my adult years as well. They would upgrade the drum set. So it went from like playing a little play school plastic kit to a more appropriate like Ludwig. I think a Tama kit actually. I was playing a Tama before my current set.
Oh, nice.
An old vintage Tama set. But I started playing around 5 years old. Same thing with singing. And as far as I can remember, this was what I wanted to do. I'm doing what I envisioned myself doing way back then. I don't ever remember really in kindergarten or preschool or grade school or junior high thinking I wanted to do anything differently. I don't recall a career path like.
So even when you were young, even in elementary school, you already saw yourself playing music.
That's all I really wanted to do. Yeah. It wasn't so much an obsession at that point, but I mean, and maybe also as a kid, I don't really recall planning my future that far back, but I don't remember wanting to be a fireman or a police officer or a doctor or the jobs you start to learn about when you're first learning about adulthood, and adults have jobs and they go to work and that kind of stuff. I do remember always just wanting to perform and play music.
Yeah. And so it seems like you always sort of knew exactly what you wanted, even from a very young age. Even if you didn't know specifically like what it was specifically, you sort of had a hunch and you always went after that sort of, that hunch that you had, which I absolutely love because personally, I feel like a lot of us, I include myself in that because I've definitely have learned and matured over the years. But I think a lot of us when we're young, we're sort of taught to, have a plan B kind of thing, like try and be this type of employee or whatever, but you seem to have always known that this is the path for you. You know what I mean? And there was never any doubts in your mind, were there? Like you always were like, hey, this is it.
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember thinking, I remember more so just thinking about how I was going to make this work. What did I need to do to have music be a career? And also the business side of things really I found my niche in the business aspect while I was in college. That's when I realized that I had a knack for organization and booking and connecting dots when it came to touring and trying to figure out the best ideas for performing careers.
Yeah. How did you figure that out? Like how specifically did you figure out that you were good at connecting dots, that you were good at sort of organizing things? Because personally, I feel like it's something that's taught to everybody, but not everybody is great at it. You know what I mean? Like it takes a very specific mindset to be a great promoter or to be a great booking agent, to be a great manager. And so how did you figure out that you were good at those things?
Well, I'm always still learning. And this is a very, the long form version of that answer is, well, no, there is a long form version of that answer. Essentially to try to be as explanatory as I can. It was after I got sober, I realized at that point I put a bunch of energy into doing the band and figuring out all the focus that I would put before into doing things that were bad for me. I started to put into things that would still quote unquote make me high, but were natural and healthy. And one of those things was business and running a band's business and figuring out how do bands actually make money. It was a foreign concept.
It's still a foreign concept, to be honest. It's still a foreign concept to a lot of us.
On our first tours, it was like blasphemy to ask for money. And when bars would hand us $60 for gas, we'd be shocked because we never expected anything. So as we were developing, I thought, okay, obviously there's career musicians, there's career bands, and they are finding a way to make it work, which means they're getting paid. And I started studying where do different revenue streams come from. And it really started becoming more of a focus when I realized in my lectures in school, even if they were music lectures, but whether it was history, statistics, I would just be zoning out instead, booking tours and trying to figure out the best cities to play and researching venues in different cities. Our very first tour we ever did, we all just sat down and thought, okay, we want to play different cities. How do we do it? And instead of reaching out to trying to find a booking agent who would help us, we just started doing it. We started Googling cities and emailing absolute cold emails to different venues. And one contact leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and eventually figured out the best way to go about it. But once I think it was in those lectures when I'd realized I was getting much more of a rush and much more fulfillment working on these tours in the middle of my classes is when I actually realized that was the direction I wanted to go. In fact, I even told the head college professor at the time, who was overseeing the recording arts program, I told him that going into my senior year, that I felt like I had lost my passion for recording, and I much rather pursue a business career in the music industry because I preferred to perform and I preferred to book tours and work in that side. I didn't want to be the person sitting down engineering records. I wanted to be the person behind the microphone or telling that person what I wanted them to do, so to speak.
So
And
you
he
were
totally
studying to be like
respected
an
that.
engineer then, right? That's what you were trying to
Yeah,
do?
Shane and I both have degrees in recording arts. The name of the degree is music technology with the option in recording arts. And Shane also went in the music industry option as well. But I just did the recording arts option
Yeah.
because since I was in fifth grade or sixth grade, I remember coming home from school, my first few junior high schools, and recording, or the first few years of junior high school, and recording little songs I would write in my garage. And I was obsessed with recording. And since then I got the digital, we had a tape Tascam recorder, and then we got the
Oh,
digital
man.
Fostex 8-track recorder. And then we upgraded to GarageBand, then upgraded to Cubase, and then started using Logic, and essentially landed with Pro Tools. But for my whole uh, growing up in junior high into high school, I was always recording. I would record our band, I would record friends' bands. So I thought that was my calling at first. I
Damn.
knew, of course, it was music, but I thought it was going to be in the recording aspect. And as my college education progressed, I realized that it was just changing, and I was starting to really force it. I'd see the drive in my classmates' eyes as they were figuring out new techniques and having fun fucking around with sounds and samples to make different different
Sounds or
things
like,
to record.
yeah.
And get creative that way. And I just was not into it. I was really trying to force myself to be into it. And eventually I let go of that and realized
Did you
if
know that
life's
you were
pulling me in a
forcing
different
yourself
direction.
though? You know what I'm curious? Did you know you were forcing yourself? Or did it take you a little while to realize that, oh, wait a minute, I'm totally not into this? You know what I mean?
That's a great question, actually, and I've thought about it since, and I did, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. In fact, it really took a toll on my confidence too, because I remember really beating up on myself, not being. I'd see the drive of my classmates and my best friends who were in the program as well, and they would just be so stoked on getting into the studio and trying to get the best quality projects done as they could, and I just want to get that shit done. I didn't
Yeah.
care about necessarily. The excitement was gone for whatever reason. I still like to record, but now at that point I realized if this isn't something that I'm super passionate about, and I'm not going above and beyond to contact studios outside the school to intern at and seek jobs afterwards as a recording engineer, like that kind of frightened me. Thinking of taking these days where I would just be engineering all day.
Yeah.
That's when I realized I'm gonna accept this and realize that I'm being pulled in a different direction. I mean, I was always a performer as well, but I thought it wasn't always business. It was performing and recording. And I just naturally ended up doing the performing in the business.
Yeah, dude, I love what you're saying because I studied music industry as well in college. And
Okay.
one of the things about at least my program, we basically studied everything overall. You know, like we didn't have any specific, what's the word, focuses, you know, but
Right.
it was like an in-depth study of everything, you know, whether it was licensing, whether it was copyright, whether it was recording, whether it was performance. We got a little chunk of everything, right?
Right.
And I know for a fact that it can be very, like when you first get into the music industry stuff, I think most of the kids, myself specifically, had an idea of what we wanted to be. Like I went in there thinking I would be a producer, you know? And then it took me a little while to figure out that it's not that I didn't care, because I think most of us that are musicians care about everything because it's interesting, it's music. But
Yeah.
I cared a little bit less about that aspect. And it took me a little while to figure out that I wasn't meant to be that producer at that time, and that my efforts were better spent elsewhere. And it seems like you sort of figured it out by experimenting with other sides, with the booking side, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And hearing you talk about all the industry stuff as well, I did have, of course, part of the curriculum was industry classes, regardless of the option we chose.
Right.
But even that would sometimes frighten me, like all the legalities.
Yeah.
And I mean, what essentially, and it was a fantastic program, but
For
we
sure.
couldn't fully grasp what we were learning until we started doing it. That's my personal experience. Started actually doing it and working outside in the field and learning by doing. That was just the the knowledge I got in college was great, and I referred to it many times in the last 8 years. But actually doing it myself was the most effective way to really connect what I was being taught and how it worked. And things are always changing in the industry, as you know.
Oh, absolutely. And I love your approach to this. Here's one thing I'm curious for you specifically, because since we both essentially come from the same kind of schooling, I'm curious what you think. Obviously, I think both you and I have figured out a lot of things on our own. Like I didn't go to school for broadcasting, but when it comes to podcasting, I just jumped in and figured it out as I went along. Very much like you with booking, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like, especially for topics like this, like music industry stuff, music business stuff that you're excelling at, is school necessary? Does it go hand in hand with personal experience? Because I can attest to that. I loved going to school. I loved learning, but for the most part, a lot of it was very much terminology. What I got out of it was the experience of being around like-minded people. Almost everything that I've achieved has been stuff that I figured out on my own. But my opinion is irrelevant at this point. I'm honestly curious what you think. Did going to school help you sort of put you on that path to become a successful booking agent? Or could you have ideally just achieved the same success in booking that you would have gotten without school, if that makes sense?
It does. And I've thought about that question many times.
And I'm not even sure there's an answer. You know what I mean? I'm not even sure there's an answer specifically, but I'm curious.
That's what I was going to say. And I know it's kind of a safe answer, but I think everyone's path is different. Right. I work with professionals who started doing this right out of high school and never went to college. And I work with other people who did go to college. They went to Berkeley for music industry, or they studied it at any number of universities, and
right.
and it helped lead to where they are. I do think it's different for every person. And for myself, while I've mostly learned what I'm doing by just doing it. I needed to be in that environment to kind of find myself and realize that was a passion I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And to meet all the people. I mean, it's like it's the butterfly effect. Like something leads to something else way down the road.
Yeah.
And so being in that environment and figuring out what it was like to learn about music industry and recording helped me help shape the direction I was going to go. So school was necessary for me, but not necessarily because of everything that I learned, but because of the way it shaped the direction of my life and where I was going to go after that.
I love that. I mean, it's just your story. It doesn't matter what other people did or what other people are planning on doing. It's what you did, and it's obviously resulted you in being very successful and doing what you're doing. What I'm curious about specifically is you started booking for your band, right? You started basically trying to figure out tours and all that stuff. When did you feel like your experiments, your research, when did that start paying off? When did you actually start feeling like I got this booking thing? Oh, at least I'm figuring it out. You know what I mean?
When it hit, it always kind of hits in different tiers, even still to this day. So I think to answer that question, the first time I felt like I was learning more and more how to do it efficiently was probably our third tour. Going back to the same contacts and realizing I had to keep those relationships. It was realizing the importance of a relationship.
Yeah.
That was the big aha moment for me, was working on these relationships. I mean, it's fun to do it, and I like to connect with a bunch of different types of people, but it's also very important if you're going to be touring and building your own. It's important to build your own network and make sure that you trust the people you're working with, and that everyone sees eye to eye and everyone has mutual goals. And so going back to the same spots, I realized that I was able to book a tour much more quickly than I had the first few times, just because I kind of knew the circuit and I knew the venues. And if something fell through with a different spot, I knew a number of people who could lead me in a different direction. I'd say around the third tour, and just realizing how important relationships were to keep.
That's awesome. I know we were talking about that beforehand about just your knack, basically, how much you enjoy networking, which is something that honestly I don't think a lot of musicians do. I know that a lot of us do that, but most, I think, spend their time on their craft, which is fine. I think it's perfectly fine to do that. But you're very different. Like you were telling me how even on the first couple of tours, you were just talking to everybody, you know, whether the house was full, whether it was empty, no matter what it was, you were just bouncing back and forth. Once the doors open, you were like, hey, we got to like interact. We got to meet people. Like you were all about that.
Definitely, man. It's always been, it's always going to be a learning process for sure. And I know you and I had chatted about this before, but when we first started getting our bigger breaks on national touring, I think it's back in 2012, playing cities we'd never been to, like showing up to New York City for the first time, or Florida or Chicago, and playing in front of hundreds of people who would have never heard of us otherwise. I viewed those as, of course, the opportunity itself was incredible to play in front of people who may never hear us, but it wasn't enough to just do that. I felt like for my sake, I wanted to meet the crew of the venue, meet the promoters. I made up little business cards, which to me, I realize now is sort of an obsolete thing to do, because it's about you want to put FaceTime in and let them like have a conversation just before you pass off a business card.
They got to put a face to the name.
And so I'd introduce myself to as many promoters or promoter reps as possible, and tell them I too was starting to book bands that I believed in. And I also started to view our business as a band of, okay, how can we now go from, this has always been a fun and passionate thing for us, but now we're trying to turn it into a living, into an honest living. By still doing what we love to do. And the way that I view and the way I still view it is, in a sense, you got the creative side of the band, which I too have a large hand in. I love to be creative, and I do like to perform, and I love to write music. And then you have the business entity, and the way I've always seen it is, whenever doors open, if that be 6 p.m. at 6 p.m., that's the time that the Hail the Sun store is open. That's our storefront. And from 6 p.m. until whenever the last patron leaves the venue, that's how long our shop is open. And we have to take advantage of every minute that we are open to reach as many people as we can, and really squeeze everything we can out of an opportunity. So that means going back, especially at the beginning, going back to the merch table. So if we had won anyone in the crowd over, we could be in the back of the room afterwards, put in some FaceTime with them, and doing everything we can to hopefully make the next time we were in that city as successful as it could be, based off the time that we were currently there.
Dude, you're dropping so much knowledge on me, and I absolutely loved it. I know we talked about this beforehand, and I love this because I told you this, and I am going to say it again. You're literally the first person I've ever heard that's described their band as a storefront, and I think it's a brilliant comparison, because look, we're obviously interested in music. At some point, we fell in love with making music, and it's a very creative art form. I mean, it's an art form. It's what it is, and it's what drives everything at its core. But when you choose to make it a living, and it doesn't even have to be music. It could be anything. It could be painting. It could be sculpting. It could be skateboarding. I mean, for all I care, you have to treat everything as some sort of a business, and it's a balance, honestly, between being creative and being business minded.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. I was about to say that. The big challenge, and I guess this can even be said for anything in life, is the balance. Is finding a way to have everything live harmoniously together, and the balance of staying creative, staying true to the art that you believe in, and are putting everything you have behind it, and making sure that the business aspect doesn't override it. But at the same time, we are trying to make a living as musicians, and so you just have to be aware of it. It doesn't mean you have to quote unquote sell out. Although I saw a video, as a tangent, I saw a video one time where the Mars Volta were asked about being sellouts, and I love their answer. I think it was something to do with they rather sell out a venue than not sell out a venue. So the term itself is just kind of silly, in my opinion, the whole sellout idea. But essentially, I digress. You don't want to sell out or do something you don't believe in just because you can reap financially. It's about the balance and making sure at least for us, everything that we're doing, everything that I'm doing, I want to be able to, at the end of the day, can I sign my name to it? That's another thought that's constantly going through my head at the end of a work day, at the end of a tour date, at the end of a tour is, do I feel comfortable signing my name to this, knowing that
proud of it?
Exactly, putting my full backing behind it. Is there something I could improve before I do that? Or is there something that I can do without because it doesn't represent us as a whole? It doesn't represent the band, or it doesn't represent me. And therefore, I should learn to cut that out.
Yeah. No, I love your thought process when it comes to things, because I can clearly see where the business mindset meets the creative side by talking with you. I can definitely see that you're an experienced man, but you're also a very creative man. And I think those are really good balances. And I want to pick your brain on a lot of these things. Here's one of the things I'm curious about, because you obviously taught yourself while you went along. As you were building your relationships and you were sort of working with your band on the early stages, what would you say was the most important aspect when it came to growing your band before you started getting national attention, or before you sort of got to where you're at today? What would you say was like the most important thing? Was it that FaceTime with your fans? Was it sort of the networking side? Or what would you argue is like the most important thing that you did that helped your band get to this point?
At the beginning, more so?
Yeah, like more towards the beginning, because I think like once you get a little bit more experience, once you get management involved, there's other moving parts. But at the beginning, when you guys were figuring it out, what were the things, or what was the thing that you felt like was the most important thing that you put your effort into it? Was it the networking side of things?
Yeah, it was making friends with all the regional bands in the areas that we wanted to go and being genuine about it. Wanting to play shows with bands that we liked and bands who had been developed in those areas, and then in exchange for them coming to our area and playing for the people that we had already played for a bunch of times. A lot of making friends, reaching out, getting to know all the bands and the people who were involved in the scenes outside of our cities, because ultimately that's how word is spread in person rather.
Yeah.
And then of course, as I mentioned before, the internet really helped.
Oh yeah. Hands down.
It helped as well. And that kind of can have a mind of its own. Ours was more so putting the FaceTime in with all the friends that we were making and the different bands that we were playing with across the different cities that we wanted to go.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, because I've toured myself and I have a couple other friends that are in some big bands, some small bands, but everyone's opinion is slightly different. So I'm curious what yours is. A lot of my friends believe that specifically nowadays, over the past maybe 3-4 years, the demographic has changed a bit when it comes to live shows, whereas maybe in like 2010 to 2014-ish, you can tour on different tours, you can sort of cross-promote with different bands, and you'd sort of garner a fan base that way. But nowadays, I actually hear the argument that it's harder to do that nowadays, that people go to live shows because they know the band, and it's sort of hard to catch people's attention that way, at least a little bit more difficult than it was, say, 4 years ago. And I know that's a short amount of time, but I'm curious if maybe you have felt something like that. Maybe you haven't even noticed, but I'm curious, especially as a booking agent. I'm curious what you think.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. Could you explain it a little more?
Yeah. Okay. So the idea being that let's say you were explaining how you sort of got to know other bands and you would play on their circuit because they were established, and therefore you'd be exposed to their audience, and they would do the same thing in your circuit. They'd come over to your city and they'd play and they'd basically get your audience. What a lot of the friends that I've been talking to, what they argue is that nowadays, a lot of people don't go to shows for the sake of just going to the show and seeing who's there. It's more of like, oh, my favorite band is playing, I'm going to go. And it doesn't really matter who's on the billing. And so therefore, even though they'll like your music, it's more of the fact that they went for their band. And even though that's always been the case, I think a lot of them argue that it's a little harder to sort of do that cross-promoting thing. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. So I've got two thoughts when it comes to that topic. The first one is it means more and more we have to get creative with the billing. We have to get creative with the packaging of the bands that are going out together. It's about trying to, and that's one of the cool parts, and the art of booking tours that I love is figuring out lineups and what's going to work the best, not only to help push tickets, but for a concert goer's experience. Because overall, that's what we're in the business of entertainment, both performing or booking. And that's an art form in itself, is trying to find the best entertainment for an evening that also is going to help drive ticket sales up so that everyone wins all across the board. So it just means these days bands have to get a lot more creative about who they're going out with or who they want to take out. If there's so many different variables, more and more, the creativity of packaging up is important. Where I'm trying to think about if I can put it to any particular examples. We toured with Silent Planet, very, very good friends of ours. We extremely endearing band to us, and they took us out on their first big headline tour after Warped Tour spring last year, and they can be considered a metalcore band. Lots of screaming and not so much singing, but they took us out as their direct support band, and it worked really well. We played to a bunch of metalcore fans who may had heard of us or may have had never heard of us, but it seemed to land amongst them. They ended up enjoying us because they could get behind the aggressiveness, and therefore if we could turn their heads with any aggression, they then seemed to be more open to the soft points of our band and the more melodic singing of our band. And the other way around, we found that Hail the Sun fans, if they already weren't Silent Planet fans, still really enjoyed the band. They're very, very open-minded, and of course, anyone who sees Silent Planet, in my opinion, is gonna end up liking the band. Yeah, so it really worked there. It meshed, and fans could come over, and we could kind of cross promote. I feel like that was a good example of a tour that worked. So that's the first thing that came to mind. The other thing is just show attendance in general. As you mentioned, people that I'm seeing less and less are just going to shows to go to shows. And you know what? Like, we can't even necessarily complain about it. You can't control what people like and what they don't like. If someone wants to stay home and fuck around on Facebook or on YouTube instead of going to a show, we can't berate them for it. Yeah. It's just, that's what's happening. And back in 2007 to like when I was first in metalcore bands and death metal bands, like way back in high school, me and Eric played in punk bands and a couple metalcore and death metal bands. We'd go to these local shows that were just fucking packed. 300 people from all around who have never even heard of the headlining touring band, but the scene was just so and I hesitate to use that word, but I'll use it for this sake. The scene, it was thriving. People came to shows to see what was happening that weekend, to meet up with their friends. It was before the big cell phone era. And I'm not one of the people that's like an old timer thinking shit has changed. Everything's whack now. Kids these days don't know what's up. I mean, it's just changed. And we got to learn how to adapt. But yes, people aren't coming to shows anymore unless they're familiar with the bands, because they do want to stay home and fuck around on YouTube. Whether or not that's a problem that we have that needs to be fixed. I mean, I would love it much more. Myself, I can speak for thousands of musicians that would way rather have people come to shows just to check out the entertainment for the night, like the good old days. But that's just, it's not the way it is anymore from what I'm seeing. And that's that.
Yeah, dude, I love that you're honest about it, and then your point of view is on point, because there's so many things that we can't ever change. I mean, this whole topic of the industry is changing. always happens every decade. If it's not live shows, it's streaming, or it's, the whole concept of downloading music, like that was a big thing when we were kids, you know what I mean? And so it's like there's always going to be something. And I love that you're willing to adapt and that you find that it's important. But here's what I'm curious about. As a booking agent, you mentioned this in your first point, and I want to just sort of reiterate, even though I think you answered it. Just curious to know a little bit more. As a booking agent, do you feel like the solution then to sort of, obviously not counting the main band, the solution to sort of provide a good show, the solution is having a great lineup that works, is basically what you're saying? Or what you were saying for point one. Yeah. So
ideally.
And how does a booking agent like you go about deciding, like, let's say you have a headlining band and you know who they are and you need to fill the first 2 spots, but you want to try and bring something new, something that's not exactly the same, but that's along the lines of what your headlining band is. How would you go about sort of figuring that out? Like, how do you do research? Do you just ask your friends? Do you sort of research it online? Because I'm curious how you would come up with like a good lineup that would sort of solve that issue that we were talking about.
Awesome. And that's an excellent question, and something that is always, it's a topic of finding solutions to those types of questions. First of all, I mean, I don't book any insanely big band right now. My roster is ever expanding, and I don't have any Paramore type acts. But
not many of us do, though, man. Not many of us do.
Yeah, it can be. That's where the variables come in. If you have a band, so 2 different. I'll try to, in my opinion, break it down into what I feel like would be easier to explain in 2 parts. First part is, if you have a band that's going out and they're a headlining band that is proven to be able to draw 500 tickets, and they want to go out and they want to play 500 cap clubs. They just want to go and try to do a sellout tour. In that instance, the 2 support bands don't need to be hard ticket bands. They don't need to be bands that are going to really help pull more tickets. It doesn't hurt. But the headliner band in that instance might want to bring 2 bands that are kind of street cred bands that are hip at the time or cool, and bands that might not be worth any people at all, but they've gotten a lot of good press. They've gotten a lot of like the cool bands are talking about it, a band's band. So they might ask them to come out and keep support budget very cheap, because in those rooms they can sell them out on their own regardless. So why not just have a cool look tour and bring out the newest buzzing band on Revolver or alternative press circuit. And then you can have a tour where the same band wants to go into 800 to 1,000 cap rooms. So in that case, what they're going to be looking at, what I'd be looking at in my support bands, in a direct support band, maybe even a co-headline situation, is a hard ticket band, is a support band that is going to bring an additional 200 tickets and will still sort of take a pay cut because they want to play in front of the 500 people that the headliner can bring on their own.
Yeah.
But that put together creates a bigger attended show. And in that sense, it's about finding the balance between a band that the headliner band feels comfortable taking out. And a lot of the times, I will say, they take out their friends. The headline bands want to tour with bands that they know, with their friends' bands.
Well, yeah.
It's like a giant party.
You don't be stuck with people
road.
You don't like for 6 months.
Exactly. I mean, that it's much more common that if they can do it with bands that they're familiar with, bands that they know, they will. But anyway, if you're trying to make a statement by going into bigger rooms to make a big look to sell out large cap rooms with a lineup, then the opening acts that you're going to want to pick, you're going to want to pick bands who do have proven ticket sales, and that can get tricky.
Donovan, man, you're spitting so much knowledge. I'm taking notes for myself. I'm not a booking agent myself, but this is good knowledge that I'm gonna pocket for future references. What I'm curious about is I almost forget that you're a badass drummer and that you have a pretty badass band that's on tour right now and making a lot of really cool shit. Like, I almost forget that when I hear you talk about all this knowledge that you've gained on your own. Does that ever? I mean, probably not, but I'm curious, like, how do you balance sort of being a drummer and a booking agent at the same time? Because I'd imagine, obviously it's different for everybody and it's probably different for you, but for me at least, I'd imagine that it would be hard to sort of switch from being a booking agent and immediately become a drummer that same evening, because I'd be looking around at all the things that could have been done better as a booking agent while I'm sitting on the drums. You know what I mean? Like, that's what runs through my head. So for you, I'm curious, how did you learn how to balance those two mindsets? Because I think that they're different, but you seem to balance them really well.
Well, first off, thank you very much for all those kind things that you were saying. I do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And they are very different mindsets. Very different. Whenever I am, the short answer is just time management, dude. Time, to me, and a lot of the people I work with, time is the most important thing. Money comes and goes. People, well, of course, relationships as well. But you never know how much time you have. So in managing time, it is possible to do more than I may have thought at one point is capable, or may have thought I'm capable of doing, rather, is the correct way to say that. So if I'm tracking or if I'm recording, my preference is to always record in the evening or nighttime, because it's after office hours. It's a time when people are away from their desks, they're away from their computers, and they're not necessarily doing any business. I like to keep any office hours wide open in the daytime. That includes on tour as well. If I'm touring, I really, the way we tour now, we have enough crew where we can comfortably, I myself can work during the day, the whole day. And whenever we arrive where we're going to go, I may know the promoter or know someone in town who has an office, or I'll use the production office, or I'll just go to a cafe and work from there until we play. On tour, the only time I can't be reached is when I'm on stage performing. Aside from that, a big part of it is also always being available. I have found that to be crucial. And someone, I can't remember who said this. This is another quote I should remember, but 50% of the job is showing up. And I love that quote because it's true. Yeah. Just being there, being present, being reachable it's funny how that's like a standard these days. If you can get an email back within 24 hours all the time, it's like amazing these days. Or,
I know, right?
Return a phone call. and I've had to find different ways to organize my workflow and organize my inbox. So I make sure nothing gets by me, and something that needs an immediate response gets an immediate response, and something that I can take a little more time to respond to, I'll put in a different section of the inbox and stuff like that, just to make sure that I'm always going to be able to address any issue that comes along my way. And up until now, I have found that there is enough time to get all this stuff done, as long as I am showing up and doing and paying full attention at all times of the day. Or from when I wake up.
Yeah, you seem to love that, huh? You love having that sort of balance of being able to work in the day and perform at night. I mean, it seems like the perfect setup, to be honest with you. It is the absolute perfect setup.
I really like it. I like it because the big picture for me is just growing something and being a part of something that's bigger than myself. I want to leave marks and make a difference in not only the music that we write and create and perform, but also in the bands that I work with. I love being a part of a band's career. They've trusted me with their booking career, and I don't take that lightly. That's something that they lean on me for any type of work. It's their livelihood. And of course, it's a team effort with different managers, labels, and the band themselves.
Right.
But it's a very important job, and I got to make sure that I can pay enough attention to it. Otherwise, no one's doing anyone any favors. I do love to stay busy, but sometimes it does suck to miss out on things in the daytime. Like if there's a landmark or an attraction in that particular day in that city, but it's just a busy day and I can't take the 2 or 3 hours away to go do it, I'll miss out on stuff. But it's worth it in the end, because like I said, I want to build something from the ground up, and I've wanted to do that since, for the last decade. So for as long as I can remember.
I love that. And I love that we can relate to that. A lot of our motivation sort of comes from that desire to build something and leave marks. And I love that. you seem very disciplined. I keep saying I love that because whenever I find someone whose mindset I can sort of relate to, I'm very happy because it does take a type of person, and it's different. Sometimes I feel like that discipline is learned. Sometimes it's earned. That's a different word, earned. And sometimes it's just embedded in somebody. You know, for me, I definitely had to learn that discipline. I'm not nowhere near as disciplined as you. I definitely could improve a little bit, but the only way I can perform and do this podcast is by having a very similar schedule to what you have. What I'm curious is, while you were learning how to book, did you sort of adapt this sort of lifestyle, this sort of being able to balance, kind of working in the day, performing at night, and prioritizing your tasks, or were you always this way from the very beginning? Because I know you were saying how you've always known that you were going to do music stuff. So that made me curious to see if you always had that, some sort of discipline growing up, or if you had to sort of set it in play, learn it one day, and just tell yourself, okay, I got to be disciplined from this point on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been adapting for sure. Not always been that way. And of course, let it be said, dude, there are off days for sure. Way more off days than one may think. And even doing a bunch of shit there, you can still find free time. It's possible to step, as I'm sure you know as well, you can step away sometimes 15 minutes to an hour. And then I love the middle of the night. It's one of my favorite times of the day because it is kind of radio silence. Unless there's an issue with a tour on the East Coast or something, or on the West Coast when I'm on the East Coast and I get a call in the middle of the night. With the exception of those times, it's quiet and you do have time to yourself. And if I want to watch a video of an interview of one of my favorite artists, I can without feeling guilty. But not every day is always super productive, and there's definitely on and off days. But as I started touring more, I realized, okay, I want to still be able to do both. Like, I like doing both. I feel like it's possible. So as a new burden would show itself, or as my clientele would grow, I would kind of adjust my schedule and be on our very first national tour. I didn't have an iPhone at the time, actually. Back in 2012, I was late to the game with iPhones. So,
so was I, man. So was I.
We'd pull into truck stops at, 11 or midnight or whenever the fuck we'd pull in, or we'd stay at friends' houses. And I would have to just wait until I got to a truck stop or a Starbucks or a friend's house to log on to internet. And man, that was terrible, terrible times to not have that hotspot that we have these days. But even at that point, I was just starting out. I only had a few bands I was working with, but I felt responsible to run into a truck stop at 2 a.m. to let my inbox fill itself to see what I'd missed in the last 6 hours since I'd been at the venue or something. But it was adapting for sure. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of I always feel like I could be more disciplined for sure, but I do recognize that it was after I got sober that my energy completely shifted to fill it up with productivity. And that was a big, I guess the beginning of trying to discipline myself and do the things that I love that are actually worth the time and I get fulfillment from, because I was going to cut out all the bullshit.
Yeah. Dude, actually, I know you mentioned that a little bit earlier, and it piques my interest just a little bit, if you don't mind me asking. When did you get sober? Like, was it right before you started doing the band stuff? I think that's what you said earlier. I'm not sure.
It was March. My clean date's March 14th, 2010.
Wow.
No, I'm sorry, 2009. God, it's been so long. 2009 is the clean date. So it was almost 10 years ago.
Almost 10 years ago. Congratulations on that, man.
Thank you.
Dude, can I ask you, like, what, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask, but, I'd like to know sort of what led to your decision to become sober? I mean, obviously, I think that may be a bit of a broad question,
right.
But, clearly your life is where it is now. It's great. You're killing it. Your band is doing great. You're a successful person. But I personally believe in choices, and I know that choices always change our lives. And I'm curious, like, what was your life before, and sort of what made you choose to sober up, and that essentially led you here? So I'm curious.
I was just in a really dark time in my life, and living for the wrong reasons, doing just bullshit. I mean, just such a bullshit type of a bullshit way to live. So unproductive. And initially, I knew I had to get help. I'm a recovering drug addict, so I knew that I did have a problem, but it was my family at first that I couldn't necessarily fight for myself at the time. I just put my trust in them, and I come from a family that has a history in this, and they saw what was happening. I came clean to them about everything. I mean, it wasn't a big secret at the time anyway, but I let them know that it was just progressing more and more, and they stepped in to help me, and I just kind of had to trust them. I was in AA meetings, NA meetings, and really hearing other people's stories, especially people who were in their mid 40s or 50s or even older, talking about how it took them up until that point to get clean, how much shit they had lost, and picturing myself in that position, it just was tragic. It really, really hurt my heart to think about wasting time or perhaps ruining other people's lives, only to fix it down the road. Like, why not nip it in the bud now? But at first, it was really hard to see that. It took a while for the clouds to part, I guess I should say. And I really just had to trust in my family. It was my choice, and I was ready to do it, but I couldn't have stuck with it in the beginning if I hadn't been for my family, friends, and loved ones who helped out in that beginning stage.
Wow, man. I mean, I appreciate you opening up about that. Like,
no worries.
Yeah, I guess what I'm curious about is, do you feel like that era in your life sort of contributes to a lot of that driving force that you have nowadays? Obviously, there's so many things that contribute to that, to all of our motivations and driving forces. But I personally feel like there's certain moments in life that, stand out above others. And I'm curious for you, do you feel like that moment in your life serves as a reminder or sort of helps you move along, if that makes sense?
I'm not sure if that's been the main force. I do think that I always have had a drive in me, but that just really fucked it up. It padded it, and by that I mean active addiction. It made me lose path of what I really like to do and what I wanted to do, and it changed my personality a little bit at the time, where it covered up that drive. It took precedent over everything. And while I don't necessarily like to think that defines me, what I will say is I do owe everything that's happened since then to my sobriety, because I needed it for myself. Not everyone's the same. I have nothing against anyone who wants to do what they want to do with their life. And I really mean that. For myself, I can't smoke weed recreationally. I can't drink recreationally because something happens in my brain that, whether one wants to say it's will or not, I go down a rabbit hole, and it's not good. And for myself, I just have to completely cut that shit out in order to stay moving forward. So I do owe a lot of the accomplishments. They wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't gotten sober. That's definitely for sure. But I'm not sure at this point in my life I'd say it necessarily defines me.
That's good, man. I'm glad that you recognize all those things, because it's true. Everyone's life is different. Everyone's choices are going to be different. But I'm glad that it seems to me like you've come to terms with a lot of things in your life, and you simply make the choices that are going to make you happy. And I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of people can learn from someone like you that it doesn't necessarily matter what choices that people want to make. It's more about understanding what's important to you and making choices that reflect that, if that makes sense. Because
right.
we're not here to even give a PSA. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm genuinely just curious about your mindset. But that's what stands out to me about you, is that it doesn't really matter what the action is. You were able to identify what was important to your life, and so therefore you live for what's important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I was very lucky at the time to have seen that, and also to have the support group I had. I really can't stress that enough, was having the support group that I had to constantly remind me and keep me on course. And these days, my day does not consist of trying to stay clean. It doesn't consist of trying to stay away from drugs and alcohol. In fact, in this industry, I'm around that shit a lot. So
yeah, I was about to say that.
It's not at the forefront of my everyday life anymore. It hasn't been for years and years. But I try to never forget it, because it is a place that I was in my life, and I'm very grateful to not be in that spot anymore. But these days, I don't even think about it. I acknowledge it. I realize that I can't do the shit that I used to do. And instead, I fill my day up with things that make me feel good and things that are fulfilling, and a drive and wanting to just build. I hardly even think about using or what those days were like anymore.
Yeah, I'm curious. Does your band's music ever, and maybe this might be a little too personal or something, but I'm curious if the music that you've made in the past with Hail the Sun, does that reflect some of those moments, or does your music have nothing to do with that?
Yeah, it does, for sure. Lots of stories, and I am able to grab inspiration from those times, and it's a lot of reflecting on ways I've acted, and I have a couple. There's lyrics that are odes to my family for standing by me, and just shit like that definitely has to do with that time of my life, which I realize, I mean, now it was so long ago, but I'm still able to pull things from it, because it at the time it was a big deal.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me how we can always we can always sort of look back at our life, our choices, and we can use that for creation in the future. You know what I mean? Like you guys are making great music all the time. And I imagine that sometimes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it may be a little painful to revisit some of those memories, but ultimately it results in giving you inspiration and energy to actually write something or create something, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure if you agree, but
I've gone through so many. I'm a big proponent of therapy, of group counseling. I think even the most healthful, the most mentally, I can't. I'm trying to think of a perfect way to say this. The people who are the most perfect, mentally fit people even can benefit from counseling. I mean, I love.
Oh yeah.
I love that type of group camaraderie or one-on-one therapy sessions. And so I've hashed out a lot of that shit in the beginning years, a lot of the guilt and regret, because that was mainly what it was that was painful to revisit, was just guilt and dealing with things that I had done or people that I had wronged, that made me feel ashamed. It made me feel very guilty. But in time, of course, time has healed all, and it doesn't necessarily hurt so much anymore to look back on that like it did in the first couple of years.
Yeah, I'm glad, man. I'm glad. Thank you so much for being so open, man. I'm thinking about all the things we talked about. This is a good one. I'm glad that you had the patience and you had the ability to sort of sit with me to talk about this stuff, because this stuff is so important, and I don't think it's ever talked about enough this way. Like, obviously, I think there's many people out there talking about issues and trying to help people and always trying to inspire people to move forward. I'm not saying I'm not saying that this is revolutionary by any means, but I think that it can never be talked about enough. You know what I mean? And I appreciate your openness about this kind of stuff. To sort of start wrapping things up, man, if you don't mind, it's going to be like a weird transition, but I'm floored by everything you've told me. I'm inspired, and I'm really happy that you've taken the time to talk with me. Man, can you just tell me a little bit of what's going on with your band right now, and sort of like the music you guys are making, and sort of where you're seeing it go in the future, or at least where you want it to go in the near future?
Dude, absolutely. We have the way I like to look at our band is we have goals, we have milestones that we want to continue to accomplish and things we want to achieve, but I never want to get caught in a cycle of working as a means to an end. We really appreciate the journey we've been on so far, and everything that we've experienced, all the people we've met, the friends that we've made up until this point, on the way to the goals that they want to accomplish. And a lot of those goals we have accomplished, and we continue to continue to do so. Currently, we just released a new record 2 months ago. It's called Mental Knife, and
Nice.
we toured. We've done one tour off that already. We have plenty more planned going into the new year.
And you're booking them.
I don't book Hail the Sun. We actually have our own agent. I perform in two bands. One band is Hail the Sun, and another one is, for lack of a better term, it's been called. I'm not going to say that. It's a band that's comprised of different members of different bands. So it's got Will from Dance Gavin Dance, Sergio from Royal Coda ex Stolas, Joe from Royal Coda ex A Lot Like Birds, and myself, who comes from Hail the Sun. So it was like put together by us about 4 years ago, and since then we tour in the fucking small windows of time that we have when all of our other respective bands are also not touring. Yeah, exactly. And we've been able to keep it alive. We've done that. That's the only time that we are able to allot to this other band. And we've written an EP and released it. We wrote a full length album and released that in 2016. And right now we are gearing up to do. In fact, the music's are already recorded. It was tracked with Chris Crummett up in Portland about 2 months ago. I'm going to be going up there in 2 days or 3 days to start tracking the vocals of the new CN Bar record. And I'm currently in Ventura doing vocal demos with Sergio here. But that's going to be sometime next year with the whole CN Bar thing. As of now, we're still on, have plenty of plans coming up for Hail the Sun. And that is going, there's this thing called Night of the Blue Swan that I like to put together every year with Sergio and Will of Blue Swan Records. And this is the 4th year we've done it. And we're playing the Glass House in Sacramento, Ace of Spades. No, I'm sorry, Glass House in Pomona, Ace of Spades in Sacramento, and Santa Cruz. We're playing the Catalyst. It's Hail the Sun is a part of those, but the headliner is the Fall of Troy. So the Fall of Troy is headlining that. Hail the Sun's direct support. There's a stellar lineup below that.
Dude, that's coming up in December. Awesome, dude.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. And into the new year, we have more Hail the Sun touring, and we'll probably squeeze in a CN Bar tour where we can if everyone's window opens up. But with all of our other home bands being so busy, you never really know exactly when that's going to happen.
Yeah, dude, I love that you're keeping busy. I'm curious for the second band that you have, the one where it's all of you guys from different bands. Like, how quickly can you come up with a quick little tour? Because you're constantly working, you're always playing with your band, and everybody else is playing with their other bands. I'd imagine you don't have that much time to actually book something, so you probably have to come up with it pretty quickly. You know what I mean? I actually don't even book that band either. Both the bands that I perform in have our own booking agents, and that's because we love who we work with. We love our team. It's so great to get outside opinions from a bunch of different camps on an artist. It's a team effort. But also with the clientele that I have, I didn't want there to be any conflict of interest. I didn't want people thinking that I'm going to be gunning for my own band on tours that I might also be trying to get for clients of mine. And so it was a very important once my own booking business started to grow more and more, to be able to differentiate that and alleviate or eradicate any conflict of interest by booking my own band. If that and I'm sure it makes sense. Don't want to be, and plus it's just easier to have, like, I like having an agent for each one of those bands. I have great relationships with both of our agents who book Hail the Sun and CN Bar, and it's just easier to have them speak on your behalf, just like it's easier for me to speak on the behalf of my artists rather than them do it. Yeah. How smart, man. You're a very smart, very busy man. I need to watch you live, to be honest with you, man. I love the videos that you guys put on YouTube. I love to watch you play live. And I can't thank you enough, man, for coming on the show. You've dropped so much knowledge. I love learning about your story. And I love learning about how you basically manage your time and how you've changed your life. And now you're just living a rock style life at this point. And it's well deserved. It's well earned, my man. Like, honestly, I can't thank you enough. I keep saying that and I mean it.
Oh, dude, of course. Thank you.
No, thank you, man, for taking the time out of your day to sort of wrap things up. I know I said that before, but at the very end, what I'd like to sort of do, and it's very broad, but I'd like to sort of just wrap things up by just asking you, like, if there was somebody that was in your similar shoes who wanted to, either be a booking agent or basically do what you're doing, maybe split their time being a business guy and in a band, what would be something that you would suggest for them to always keep in mind? Like something that for them to sort of do on a daily basis, or to kind of like help them, inspire them to kind of keep doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The biggest thing I would say is persist. Just be persistent. Polite persistence is extremely important, man. Like that's a huge part of it. Don't give up, as cheesy as it sounds, and really trust your gut. If there's something that if something doesn't feel right, or really does look impossible, and it's impossible, then take a step down and reevaluate exactly where you want to head. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's only if don't do it just because of a fear of, oh, that doesn't seem possible. I mean, make the impossible happen, so to speak, in a way as well. But be realistic and persist. Absolutely persist, and always be available. That's a big one. To the people that you work with. I think I should definitely clarify that. Not just to anyone who randomly messages you on Instagram or something, but just be available to the people that you want to work with and the people that you do work with, and trust your gut.
Hell yeah, man. Honestly, Mr. Donovan Melero, you are a fantastic dude, very talented, very busy. I'm learning a lot from you, and I know that a lot of my fans are learning a lot from you. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day. It's much appreciated, man.
Of course, man. Thank you so much, Eddie.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Donovan. I know that I definitely did. And as I say at the end of almost every episode, I'm always learning. I try my best to always learn something new. And Donovan, man, I just sat back and just let him tell me all of his experiences. Even after the interview was done, I learned so much from this man. And even though I'm not looking to be a booking agent anytime soon, his approach to becoming that is definitely something that I resonate with. And it's something that I always try to encourage all of you to do in your lives at some point. Look, maybe you have your path already planned out and you know specifically what you want to do. Or maybe you don't. Maybe there's a hybrid of things you want to do. The reality is that both ways, whether you want to be a hybrid or pick strictly one career path, you can absolutely achieve both incredibly well. But I encourage you always to try something new and not be afraid to dive into something that you've never done before. I'm a firm believer that we can all surprise ourselves with what we're capable of if we just try something without worrying if we're going to mess up. And that's something that resonated a lot with me after this conversation. I knew that Donovan, he didn't necessarily train to be a booking agent. Like me, he sort of learned the basics from school, but becoming that great agent that he is today, it took for him to dive in and figure out his way as he tried new things, making mistakes along the way, learning new things, and improving his approach to being an agent. And personally, that's something I want to make sure that I share with you guys, and I make sure that you guys take away from this episode. Don't be afraid to try something. You will be surprised what you're capable of. And I know this sounds cheesy, but hey, cheesy things often tend to be very true. But I'm always trying to make sure that I encourage you to get out there, try something new, and believe that you're capable of doing anything that you want in this industry. And hey, if you enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoyed the interview I did with Donovan, definitely consider subscribing to the podcast. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM. It's featured on there. I'm everywhere that you can find the show. And honestly, I do this as much as I can. I bring on the most influential people because at the end of the day, what matters to me is inspiring you and showing you that there isn't just one way to success. There's 1,000 different ways to get out there and pursue your music career. Believe in yourself, try new things, and I guarantee you that you will find success.